welcome to my channel. I'm Nicola and I'm in my second year of growing cut flowers. I want to do all of this as economically and productive as possible, and obviously getting beautiful flowers at the end of it to to put in my house and share with friends. So if you have the same goals, then please stay tuned, watch the videos and see whether we can learn together. Hi, today I'm going to sort out my compost for the new season. The beauty of a good compost pile is the combination of, or a balanced combination of nitrogen and carbon. And that can be thought of as being, the carbon is the woody stuff. I had to think there. The carbon is the woody part of a plant, so your stems, branches, obviously brown stuff, whereas carbon is the green stuff, so grass clippings, fresh leaves, things like that are carbon. So for a good compost pile, it's expected to have, or the ideal is 30:1 ratio of carbon to nitrogen. But any one piece of material could have different variants of that. So if you've got fresh grass clippings, is predominantly nitrogen, but if it's left to get a bit older, then it has more carbon in it. And there's absolutely no way that the general public, the man on the street, will know all of the different, I've got a bit of hair sticking up, the general public will know the difference between what bit of plant has how much carbon and how much nitrogen. So the easiest way to think about it is just making sure you've got a balance of brown and green. So if you are adding a lot of grass clippings, make sure you intersperse it with some woody material, and then that will keep it going. So that the green will promote bacteria growth. So the two working together promotes bacteria growth, which causes the compost to happen. And if you haven't got a good enough mix for that, it's a slower process. So ideally, as I say, you want to be mixing things together well, and making sure that you've not got big clumps of the same material. So lawn mowers, for me, is a brilliant example, because once we cut the lawns here, we have a massive pile of grass. And I need to make sure that there's something else to go with it, otherwise it just ends up being a big clump. You're adding an awful lot more moisture to the heap at the same time, and it just doesn't mix very well. So as it decomposes down, it just gets heavier and a bigger mass, I'm going to call it, but a big clump, and so there's no air in it, and so it doesn't have structure, so it stops all of the bacteria growth from happening, which is why it becomes quite smelly. So to have a non-smelly compost heap and to have good bacterial growth and to ultimately compost down quicker, you need the good mix. In the past, for me, I have just had one compost pile that we just add to in the year, over the year, and then I move it or turn it. I normally get the tractor, not my tractor, the farmer's tractor, to turn it once a year, and I know that new pile is ready to use. So when I first did my no-dig bed last January 2022 even, then I used the compost from the previous year, so all of the compost that was made in 2021. I also at that time had another compost heap. Am I saying this right? It's from 2020 I used, so because that had been turned and was good to go, and then I had the fresh stuff that was then being left for a year to compost down. So the stuff for the 2021 was what I used going forward last season. So I made the initial beds with the 2020 compost, and then I added to it with the 2021. Now, because those were just two heaps that just got added on over time with no real management to it, then I think that could be the reason why I have got so much weeds weed seeds that have germinated, and I'm getting so much grass and so much weeds coming through, I think. So this year I need to improve that. So the theory is that you have your good mix of nitrogen and carbon, and you also try and get the temperature raised. And I've not really noticed that much in my compost heaps. Absolutely, when you add grass clippings, the temperature, even within in a pile of grass clippings alone, then the temperature within a few hours you can see it steaming. So that the green, or the nitrogen really creates the heat, and you need that in there to be able to kill the cells. So you want a temperature of about 50 to 60 ideally in your compost heap when it's first getting going, when it's first composting down, to make sure that all of the weed seeds are killed. If you can maintain that temperature, fine, but gradually it will slow down. But to get that temperature, you will need the green material, a bit of air and a bit of moisture, and that will do it. So I started last year to create a compost that was a bit more following, I'm going to say, Charles Dowding's approach for compost making. So it was in separate areas. It certainly doesn't look as nice as Charles Dowding's compost bay area, but I don't need to create as much compost, nor do I have as much material as he does. So this is mine, and I was just trying it out, so it's a bit rustic, and I'm using pallets. So if we go a bit closer, so if we're from a distance, there are 3 bays. So the first one here is what I've been using now. So I've been filling up over the winter months. The one at that end I finished in October time and closed it down so it could compost down over winter. And then the middle one is the old compost that's in there. So that middle one should be the most mature compost. So it should be the better version of compost. This one here on this side, which has been going since October, so it's been composted down since October, should be reasonable. And then that's just, I've been adding to it as recently as last week, so that's still going. But I need to finish that one off so that I can start a new one. Also during this winter, I have created a pile of wood over there that I can add when I've got too much green in the summer. In the winter, I've hardly got any green, so there is a lot of woody or brown material that's going in already, so that's not too bad. And I've also got this bag here, which has got straw bits in it. So the local farmer has straw, and at the bottom of it I just swept up the bay, and it's got the remnants of straw in it. So again, I was adding that into the compost last year, so I'm hoping the compost I've got should be good. Now I looked at a Charles Dowding's YouTube video about quick composting, and he seemed to imply that every 2 months you fill a bin, you fill the bin for 2 months, leave it for 2 months, turn it, and then it should be virtually there. It needs a little bit more time, but virtually there. So within 4 months, let's say 6 months, you should have really good fine compost. I don't believe that's happened with mine, because I have been following something similar, but I just don't think it is. So I have been trying to use the compost that's in the middle for the beds before I was covering them last week with the weed membrane, and it was not very fine. Now I don't know whether that's because the top layer had a lot of straw on it, and so it hasn't decomposed down as well, but it wasn't as great. So what I'm going to do, my plan, slightly different to Charles's, is the 2 end ones will be the working bins, so only one active at any one time. So that one's now going to be finished, and I will be starting this one at this end. You can't see it, so this end will be the new one. I am going to go through the middle layer and see if there's any usable compost and move that to the side. So I'll put it somewhere where I can easily access it. Anything that's not broken down enough will stay in that compost bin, and I will move the compost, I'll turn the compost from the older bin into that, and I will continually do that going forward. So the 2 bins will be filled as and when every 2 months, and then I will empty out anything that's reasonable and will then leave it in that central bay to further compost down. So that's my plan, and today it's about moving that compost or turning that compost to get to there. So I will switch this off now whilst I get cracking on it, and show you what's left, and show you once I've dug down a bit, see whether we've got anything reasonable to work with. So I've uncovered it, and I haven't moved any of it around, but there are some worms in it, which is a good sign really that things are starting to compost down. More worryingly, I've got thistles growing through it, which is not great, but I'll filter those out, I think, as I'm going through. But as you can see, it's quite dry on the edges. I don't know whether a layer, I don't know whether it's just the edges. I think I did put a layer of hay or straw on the top, and maybe that's what I'm seeing, and it's actually better once I dig in, but we shall see. I will be back shortly. So I'm halfway through now. I've dug the middle bay out and moved everything to the left hand side, my left. So this is the stuff that, let me just get back so you can see. That side was probably a bit too, not composted enough, let's put it that way. Whereas half of it has actually been able to be reused. I think is good enough to be used. Obviously it wasn't as neat as that. As I found good stuff, I've put it over to that side and then put the good stuff into a wheelbarrow and put it over here. So this is the good stuff. There are still there is still bits in it, but it's good enough to put on a bed. It'll break down over time, and as I'm not quite ready to use it, it'll break down as time goes on. So I will cover it up with some cardboard to avoid any further weeds getting into it and protect it and give it a bit of warmth. So now I need to move on to this bed, which is currently covered in cardboard, and move it through into the other bay, so the middle bay again. So to do this, I've found the easiest way is to dismantle my bays a bit. So as you can see, they're fairly rudimentary, made from pallets held together by garden wire. So all I have to do to dismantle them is unpick the wire, and there's another one at that side which is linked to the fence post. Unpick that. I will then move this central side out, and then I can just transfer the compost easily rather than having to either chuck it over the top or move it round. I can just move it through, so it's easier that way. So whilst this was a temporary structure to see how it goes, actually it works quite well to be able to move the sides. So I need to get on with that side now. So this is the second bay unmasked. So the pile of pallets just there, ready to be put back in position once I'm done. I think what I'm finding now is that I covered the top with straw, thinking it would insulate it, thinking it would insulate it. It looks to have hardly decomposed at all, so maybe that's not the best thing to move forward.
I'm not expecting to get any workable compost from this, but if I have, then that's a bonus. But all of this will be moved into this section here, either added up into the pile or filled into the half section that I left empty so it can be reused. I will take some of the shredded wood pile that I've accumulated over the winter, and I will put that on the bottom of that bottom of the bay area, to give a bit of air into the bottom. That's my thinking. It doesn't need to be much. I don't want to add to the compost new stuff too much, because that's to be used in the new compost bays as I'm adding the green materials. But I'll put a little bit in just to give a bit of air so that it doesn't all compact at the bottom. And I think another reason when I was digging that pile is I think it's got quite damp, so I might need to. It is the UK, so it may be the covering that I'd put on it was maybe needs to be thicker or a little bit more protective. So I'll try and work out, see whether I've got some old carpet in the barn or garage that I can cover it with. But anyway, I need to get on to moving all of that into this section here. So I've got a nice clean bay ready to start my next set of new season compost. Well, surprise, surprise, folks. Once I'd taken off the top layer of what was mainly straw and probably the dead ends or the dead plants from the cutting patch last year, it's actually pretty good compost underneath here. In fact, probably or possibly better and finer than the compost I had in the older bay, which is strange. Obviously, I improved my compost making as the season went on. This bed, this one here, did have straw added as I was adding the lawn mowings, clippings, whatever you want to call it. Whereas the previous one, I didn't have as much brown material. So actually, it would seem that you do need a good mix of brown and green to get a quicker compost, to make a quicker compost. I'll continue. I will move what I can into the good compost pile and see what we're left with. But looking good. It always feels rewarding when you've finished one of the tougher jobs in the garden. And turning the compost heap is one of those jobs. I put it off for as long as I possibly can, but it needed to get done. And I'm so pleased that it is done now, just before we're due for another cold snap. So it's got that out of the way, and I can now feel comfortable about sitting inside when it's too cold to come out. Let me show you what I've done. So the compost heap that I was filling up has now been, it looks like a dump, has now been stamped on and covered with some old bulk bags that you get from builders merchants, and we had them left over from building work, so I just keep reusing those. They let a bit of water in, but hopefully it should protect them a bit from the water. I might need to rethink that, but I'll see how this bed goes. So that's the first bay finished. Finished and ready. The second bay is the bay where we have got all of the composting manure. So this has taken what was left over from the previous previous compost that wasn't composted down enough, and it has got the later compost that again needed to be composted, which I thought wouldn't be the case, so that's fine. So it's filled up that bay. It's quite a lot, so when it comes to moving that far bay in 2 months' time into here, I'm hoping that the majority of this bed will then be fully composted. Otherwise, it's going to be a struggle to fit it all in. So what I will be doing with this bed now is just flipping over my layer of bulk bag. I'll do that a bit tidier in a minute, and that will then protect that. And then we have the new bed ready to start. So I've put a layer of the wood, shredded wood at the bottom, so it's got a bit of structure and a bit of air. It's got the bag ready to go. The only reason I'm doing that like that and having it ready is we have cows in that field come April, and I think the farmer thinks that it's the compost heaps are a bit too attractive for them, so we're just protecting it so they don't go munching in. So that's that bed ready to go. I'll put the door on once we're finished, and then this is my final compost that is good to go on the bed. So I've got quite a bit, which I'm really pleased about. Hopefully it should be enough to cover the new no-dig bed that I want to create. So that's good. I will cover that up until I'm ready to use it. So we're all ready and good to go. So of course I can create this compost system and be as messy as I want and as big as I want, because I've got the space to do that. It's tucked away in a cubby hole in my garden. I can't see it from the house, which is a good thing because it is an eyesore, and you can't really see it from anywhere else in the garden. You have to be actively coming this way, so I'm fortunate that way. But obviously if you've got a smaller garden or not as big a space to create compost, then you just need to scale it accordingly. I can fill those bins, and certainly last year with the cutting garden I was easily able to fill these month on month, whereas prior to that, just normal garden work, prior as in previous years, I couldn't, there was no way I would be filling those bins, and so I didn't need anything this big. So if you've got a new cutting patch, create something and then see where you go. So you could have those like plastic Dalek things. I would have two. I'd always have two. So you have one pile that you're creating and one pile that's composting. As a minimum, have two. Ideally three, so that you can hive off your compost that's ready to go, so you can always get access to it. You don't want it hidden underneath the bottom of some already newer compost so that you can't get at it. So with me, this middle one, once in 2 months' time when I come to turn the compost again, I will be that middle section where it's not quite compost, it's got no new compost in it, but it's got all of the composting material. That will be 2 months further down the line, and so should be compost pretty much ready, I would hope. But even if it isn't, I will move it to my end thing so that it is ready, because by the time I need it, which will be in the autumn, it will be ready, or it'll be good enough. And so I'll move that out so I've got a clear bay for turning everything else into through the season. So moving forward, I think I'll probably empty the middle bay maybe twice a year, so at about this time after the end of winter, and then again in autumn after I've used the existing compost bay, I think. But certainly being able to separate out the good compost, the usable compost, would be a good thing for you. So as I say, you don't need anything as big as this. Start small. You can certainly get more attractive compost bins if they're visible to the house. There's lots that you can buy online that are more attractive. But don't be put off by compost. Please make space, because you need it. It's the life of your soil. and that's what's going to give you the nutrition. And by adding compost to your soil, it means you don't have to buy fertilizer, you don't have to water as much. Hopefully it suppresses the weeds, so it's a win-win. So making that space, making enough space, is important for any garden, but particularly a cutting garden, because you're wanting it to be as productive as possible. Hope that helps, and we'll be back soon with another video.